Tupac Amaru Shakur, a name that has now become iconic. But before he became a legend of hip-hop, he was just a child born into chaos. On June 16, 1971, just a month after his mother, Afeni Shakur, was released from prison on charges related to her involvement with the Black Panther Party, Tupac was born in East Harlem, New York. He was named after an Incan revolutionary leader, Tupac Amaru, who led an uprising against Spanish colonial rule. Destiny had already made its mark. He was not born to stay silent. Tupac's childhood was a life on the move, frequent relocations, poverty, and violence. Yet, amidst the turbulence of street life, Tupac had the soul of a poet. He loved literature, theater, and was once a student at a prestigious art school in Baltimore. There, Tupac acted in Shakespeare plays, studied ballet, and wrote poetry. Things no one would have expected from the rapper who would later be called the Sword of the Streets. But life didn't allow Tupac to remain a peaceful artist. After his mother fell into drug addiction, Tupac was forced to leave school and dive headfirst into street life, with everything that came with it: gangs, guns, drugs, and resentment. In 1991, Tupac released his debut album, Tupacalypse Now, a fiery indictment against police brutality, racism, and social injustice. His music became the cry of the unheard, and he quickly rose to become a symbol for an entire generation that had been left behind. But fame brought enemies. The police, the media, politicians. They all saw Tupac as a thorn in their side. Many asked, was Tupac merely an artist, or was he a real threat to the social order? And that was only the beginning. Tupac entered the 90s like a blazing fire. He wasn't just a rapper, he was the banner for the oppressed, the roar of America's streets. But the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And soon Tupac was pulled into a spiral with no escape. Fame, hatred, and blood. After the success of Tupacalypse Now, Tupac went on to release critically acclaimed albums like Strictly 4, My N.I.G., G.A.Z., and Me Against the World. He became a phenomenon. The media wrote about him, TV shows interviewed him, and young people saw him as a hero. But at the same time, Tupac became increasingly controversial. He was arrested for assaulting police officers, involved in fights, and accused of rape. A case he later claimed was part of a setup to bring him down. Then, in 1994, an event changed Tupac's life forever. On the night of November 30th at Quad Studios in Manhattan, Tupac was shot 5 times while heading into a recording session. He survived, but the attack marked a turning point. Tupac no longer trusted anyone, especially those he once called friends. To him, this wasn't just a random robbery. Tupac believed it was a warning, an organized hit, planned and intentional. He accused Notorious B.I.G. and Sean Puffy Combs, 2 major figures in East Coast rap, of having foreknowledge of the attack. Though there was no solid evidence, this moment escalated the East Coast-West Coast feud into a full-blown bloody conflict. After being released from prison in 1995, Tupac signed with Death Row Records, the powerhouse label run by Suge Knight. And with that contract, he walked straight into the storm. At Death Row, Tupac released All Eyes on Me, one of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time. But with success came danger. Tupac was no longer just a rapper, he was a West Coast warrior, the face of an underground war between the coasts. He publicly dissed Biggie in the track Hit 'Em Up, one of the most vicious diss songs in hip-hop history. In it, he didn't just insult his rival, he claimed to have slept with Biggie's wife. The song wasn't just music, it was a declaration of war. And Tupac, blinded by rage, seemed to stop caring about the consequences. He got into fights, surrounded himself with gang members, and even took part in street beatdowns himself. One of the most infamous incidents happened on September 7, 1996. Just hours before his murder, when Tupac and his crew attacked a known Crips gang member inside the MGM Grand Casino in Las Vegas. Many believe this was the final spark that lit the fuse. Tupac was an artist, but also a man full of contradictions. A guy who could recite Shakespeare, then throw a punch moments later over a bruised ego. He was a symbol of love, but also the embodiment of fury. And maybe it was these very contradictions that left him with no way out. In the final months of his life, Tupac showed signs that something was off. He told friends he felt like death was closing in. He wrote dozens of unreleased songs, recorded for hours as if racing against time. He spoke about the soul, about betrayal, about the fate of those who speak too much. Maybe Tupac knew something was coming. Or maybe he was just too sensitive to a world he couldn't escape. And then that fateful night arrived. Las Vegas was glowing under the city lights. Crowds had gathered for one of the most anticipated sporting events of the year, the heavyweight boxing match between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon. Tupac Shakur was there with Suge Knight, the infamous head of Death Row Records. They arrived at the MGM Grand to watch the fight. Tupac, at that moment, was at the peak of his fame, wealthy, powerful, and celebrated. But he was also a target for many. Around 8 p.m., Tyson knocked out Seldon in under 2 minutes. The crowd poured out, electrified. Tupac and Suge strolled out of the casino, ready to continue their night of celebration. But then something unexpected happened. In the hallway of the MGM Grand, Tupac suddenly recognized someone, Orlando "Baby Lane" Anderson, a known member of the Southside Crips gang. Just a few months earlier, Anderson had gotten into an altercation with a death row bodyguard in Los Angeles. Without hesitation, Tupac charged at him. A violent brawl broke out in the casino hallway, captured entirely by security cameras. Tupac was seen kicking and punching Anderson repeatedly, while his entourage jumped in, turning the fight into a group assault. No one called the police. No one intervened. Within minutes, Tupac and his crew left the scene like nothing had happened. What they didn't know was, that moment might have sealed Tupac's fate just hours later. 10:55 p.m. Tupac was riding in a black BMW 750 OIL, driven by Suge Knight. They were heading to Club 662, a nightclub owned by Suge, where Tupac was scheduled to perform that night. As they stopped at a red light on Flamingo Road, just minutes from the Las Vegas Strip, a white Cadillac pulled up to their right. The window rolled down, and then gunfire exploded. 13 shots rang out in a matter of seconds. 4 bullets struck Tupac, hitting his chest, arm, and thigh. One pierced his lung. Despite being hit by flying glass, Suge Knight managed to speed away from the scene. Police later found the BMW riddled with bullets, tires blown out, blood soaking the front seat. Tupac was rushed to the University Medical Center of Nevada in critical condition. Doctors removed his right lung in emergency surgery. But after 6 days of fighting for his life, on September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur died. He was only 25 years old. Strangely, no one was ever arrested. No charges, no concrete witnesses, no clear suspect description. The white Cadillac disappeared without a trace. Las Vegas police were heavily criticized for their slow and sloppy investigation. Several witnesses claimed they were never questioned. Some even believed the case was ignored because Tupac was just a gangster rapper, but insiders whispered a darker theory. Tupac didn't die because of his music. He died because he knew too much, because he had crossed forces that operated in the shadows. And soon, the public began asking questions. Was this revenge from the Crips? Did Suge Knight, who sat right beside Tupac, have a role? Or was the shooting a cover for a much bigger conspiracy? Tupac's death wasn't just another drive-by shooting. It was the opening of a maze of secrets and suspicion, one that, nearly 3 decades later, still has no exit. But the questions surrounding his death lived on, and continued to spread like a slow-burning fire that had never truly been extinguished. Right after the shooting, Las Vegas police promised to get to the bottom of it. But weeks passed, then months, and still no arrests, no formal suspects, and no real progress in the investigation. Eventually, everything faded into silence. The media would later call it one of the sloppiest investigations in police history. Many believed the Las Vegas PD simply didn't care. After all, the victim was a rapper, a man with a criminal record and alleged gang ties. But was it really that simple? A leaked document from 2011 revealed that the FBI had been monitoring Tupac long before his death. Throughout his career, he was viewed by the US government as a potential extremist, not just because of the radical themes in his music, but also due to his deep family ties to the Black Panther Party, a group once labeled by the FBI as the greatest threat to national security in the 1970s. Tupac's mother, Afeni Shakur, was a prominent Black Panther, one of the infamous Panther 21, who were arrested for allegedly plotting to overthrow the government. Tupac was raised in an environment steeped in political consciousness. He didn't just write songs, he spoke about how the system failed black communities, about political prisoners, and the unseen oppression of modern America. In interviews, Tupac often said, "I'm not just a rapper, I'm the voice of a revolution." The FBI began compiling an extensive surveillance file on Tupac, tracking his performances, his close friends, his travel schedule. Phone calls, letters, internal memos, all showed an unusual level of interest. And then, after Tupac died, those files vanished. No one could explain why those records were never handed over to Las Vegas police. No one could explain why key witnesses were never properly interviewed. And no one understood why police never actively tracked down the white Cadillac, the shooter's car, even though it had been described by multiple eyewitnesses. Years later, former officers who had worked the case began speaking out. They described pressure from higher-ups, strange instructions, and the feeling that someone didn't want the case solved. There's also the theory that Death Row Records, Suge Knight's label, may have covered up the truth. Suge was already a notorious figure in the hip-hop world, known for gang ties and under investigation for money laundering and witness intimidation. Could Suge have played a role in Tupac's death, his label's biggest star? Or was he simply the second target who happened to survive? One suspicious detail: after Tupac's death, a flood of previously unreleased music was released, all through Death Row Records. They made tens of millions in a matter of months. Was someone profiting from Tupac's death? Several witnesses later claimed they were threatened if they spoke out. Some disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Even Orlando Anderson, the man suspected of retaliating against Tupac for the MGM Grand beating, was shot dead in a gang shootout just 2 years later. His case, too, remains unsolved. Layer by layer, the mystery thickens, and with the FBI refusing to fully release their files to the public, observers have grown even more suspicious. Was this really just gang violence? Or was it a silencing operation aimed at a powerful voice? One former investigator once said, "Tupac didn't die over a personal beef. He died because he said things no one else dared to say." Nearly 3 decades later, the case remains unsolved. But one thing is clear: whether it's the police, the FBI, or the music industry, everyone seems to know more than they're admitting. The question now isn't who shot Tupac, it's why doesn't anyone want the truth to come out? Theory 1, Orlando Anderson, a retaliation after the casino. This is the most widely accepted and perhaps the most straightforward theory. On the night of September 7th, 1996, just hours before he was gunned down, Tupac and his entourage assaulted a man at the MGM Grand Casino. Orlando "Baby Lane" Anderson, a known member of the Southside Crips gang, who had previously clashed with a death row bodyguard in Los Angeles. Soon after the altercation, Tupac was shot while sitting in a car with Suge Knight. Anderson instantly became the prime suspect, but he was barely interrogated and quickly released. Police claimed they lacked evidence. No one confessed. No eyewitness could definitively place Anderson in the white Cadillac that night. 2 years later, in 1998, Orlando Anderson was killed in a gang shootout in California. And in a way, Tupac's case, like Anderson, died with him. But something still felt wrong. If this was just a simple revenge killing, why did the investigation feel like it had been buried? Theory 2, Suge Knight, behind the spotlight. Suge Knight, the infamous head of Death Row Records, was sitting right next to Tupac when the bullets flew. So why wasn't Suge hit, not even once, while Tupac was struck by 4 rounds? That strange coincidence fueled a chilling theory. What if Suge wanted Tupac gone? Several motives have been suggested. Tupac was planning to leave Death Row after fulfilling his contract. He had plans to launch his own label, Machiavelli Records. In his final recordings, Tupac started expressing dissatisfaction with Death Row. His death meant the label retained full control over his unreleased music, a catalog that would generate tens of millions of dollars in the years that followed. Some former Death Row employees have hinted that Suge didn't seem too broken up about Tupac's death and quickly capitalized on his legacy. Still, others argue, if Suge wanted Tupac dead, would he really risk being in the same car within firing range? Theory 3. Biggie Smalls and the East Coast-West Coast War. Tupac and Biggie, two names that defined 90s American hip-hop. They were once friends, until Tupac was shot in New York in 1994. Afterward, he believed Biggie was somehow involved. Tupac fired back with diss tracks, including the infamous Hit 'Em Up, in which he claimed to have slept with Biggie's wife. Their relationship was shattered beyond repair. After Tupac's murder, some speculated that Biggie might have ordered a hit on his rival. But less than 6 months later, Biggie himself was gunned down in Los Angeles, under equally suspicious circumstances. 2 deaths, 2 chaotic investigations, 0 closure. Some believe both were pawns, victims of a larger force using the East Coast-West Coast feud as a smokescreen for something deeper and darker. Theory 4. The US government and a silencing operation. It might sound outrageous, but many believe Tupac was killed because he told too much truth. His music wasn't just entertainment, it was a call to revolution. Tupac rapped about injustice, racial profiling, police brutality, and a corrupt legal system. He was the son of a former Black Panther. He once said, "I can't live in a world where I'm forced to be silent." The FBI monitored him closely. His file reportedly spans hundreds of pages, many of which remain classified. To some, Tupac was viewed as a threat to national stability, especially as his influence over young Black America grew. According to this theory, his death was a quiet execution, disguised as gang violence, orchestrated by powers that wanted him silenced before he became too powerful. Final theory: Tupac never died. It sounds like a movie plot, but it's one of the most popular fan theories. Tupac faked his death to escape fame, enemies, and the toxic control surrounding his life. People claim he's been spotted alive in Cuba, Mexico, or on a private island. The music video for I Ain't Mad at Cha, filmed before his death, shows Tupac being shot and ascending to heaven, eerily mirroring reality. In many of his songs, Tupac references his own death in strange, almost prophetic ways. His alias in his final days was Machiavelli, a nod to the Italian philosopher Machiavelli, who wrote about faking one's death to deceive enemies. Of course, there's no solid evidence, but for millions of fans, this isn't just a theory, it's hope. No matter which theory you believe, one thing is certain. Tupac's death was not just another drive-by shooting, it was a real-life tragedy, one wrapped in layers of conspiracy, profit, and a long, deafening silence that has lasted nearly 30 years. And until the truth is finally revealed, if it ever is, Tupac Shakur will remain one of the most haunting names in the history of American music and culture. Tupac has been gone since 1996, but more than 25 years later, the name Tupac Shakur has never once been forgotten. He wasn't just a rapper, he was a symbol, a voice for millions who had been pushed to the margins of society. For those without a voice, without opportunity, without a place to belong. And even when he could no longer speak, his music kept speaking. After his death, several posthumous albums were released, including the Don Killuminati, the 7-Day Theory, under his alias Machiavelli. His sound grew darker, deeper, more prophetic, as if he sensed death was approaching. Throughout the 2000s, millions of Tupac albums continued to sell. His work began showing up in classrooms, studied in courses on culture, history, and even philosophy at universities around the world. Lyrics like, "I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world," became fuel for generations of artists, activists, and even politicians. His image remains everywhere. Memorial statues, street murals in Los Angeles, New York, and Johannesburg. a mind-blowing hologram performance at Coachella 2012 that made the world stop. As if he had never left the stage. Tupac once said he didn't just want to live, he wanted to leave a legacy. And he did. Not through wealth or awards, but through the immortality of his message. Yet with that legacy came unanswered questions. Who really killed Tupac Shakur? Why did the investigation stall? Did the FBI play a role? And is Tupac really dead? All of it remains speculation. The case was never closed, but it was never fully opened either. Unreleased files, silent witnesses, beneficiaries of a tragedy, a simple truth buried beneath layers of complex theories. But maybe the greatest injustice wasn't what happened the night Tupac was shot. It was how society treated him while he was alive. He was labeled a thug, a troublemaker, a threat. But few saw the artist underneath. The man who once studied ballet, wrote poetry, and cried over the pain of the world. He was a man of contradictions, rebellious but sensitive, angry but compassionate, tortured but still hopeful. I see no changes. Wake up in the morning and I ask myself, is life worth living? Should I blast myself? Those lyrics weren't gimmicks, they were cries for help, the journal entries of a soul wrestling with darkness. Even today, people still debate who Tupac was, what he stood for, and what he left behind. But one thing is undeniable: the world lost a vital voice in 1996. A voice that, had it lived, might have changed an entire generation. You've just listened to the final episode of the podcast series. Who killed Tupac? We may never know the full truth, but continuing to ask the questions, continuing to tell the story, is how we make sure no one is forgotten. Tupac Shakur, artist, poet, activist, and icon, still lives on. In music, in culture, and in the hearts of those who believe that justice, no matter how late, must still be pursued.